Lam Gom Punjam Beyong La Shaza Lo Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye Nidra Namda Rapsarave Chinye Dungön Chechen Zech Nije Tukra Levonze Kondai Sebe Zönre Mari Mentam Dungé Chezeve Lozoi Kondai Puje Tarz Yin Lai Zhe Yong Den Song Zhu Dre Che Zhu Nyamon Nyelong Le Je Chao Zhu Zhu Ze Jene Ma Re Men Sre Dung Re Nyugu Jinye Jun Ze Ra Zhe No Man Den Da Jin Sa Ju Tar Yuen Den Lu Zo Jia Se Tu Yu Gu Chun Trai Chu Dan Chu Nyi Jian Zhe Da Le Men Zhen Zhan Bei Yong Lai Du Zeden Che Je Chin Ra Wu Zre Je Da Le Ten Mu Men Ba Ra Sre Ne Ga Dan Den Ju Xiong Lu Tok Pa Ye Lo Zhe Po Pe Nong Wa Zha Du So Namda Zuzhen Serje Saje Den Tenzhen Pamye Ling Ke Benze Sherab Nye De Nongwe Chöken Sara Tumchon Drove Lama Shage Yolo Rikam Saben Mendru Dambe Sue Remye Lamje Logru Tema Jong Deshin Gujin Drebro Tenze Be Yongze Lama Jubra Che La Du Sheje Kalla Chinravi Chenguru Jen Zepe Don Durje Lin Lapo Yarbe Den Bai Kun Esan Zepe Kajurun Bai Che La Cha Je Wo Chödong Chöjin Nelu Manura Wara Chijin Zigne Chenpe Yisheje Roso Yilai Gunga Badra Wara Rikbidurje Shangla Shaje Wo Dan number 2 Samba Chongchup Chodu Semche Parambache Sal Tamne Tambe Chu Senronang.
So begin by generating the body-mind, which is to be the basis for you listening to the teachings that are to be given.
Tene Tanganzo Corse Shilani Ginane Latung Sheb Cabre Latung She Hunde Latung La Sapien Ngaye Benane Lashu Tung Jote Kondu Shu Sarre Latung Nambe Cheper de Yang Kondu Shu Zembare Tang Ngo Remdi Yewatala and Trin Tu Debre.
So the topic of the summer course, starting with the first part of it last summer, is that of shamatha and vipassana meditation. Last year the explanations on shamatha meditation were completed, and this year we're going through the segment in the Treasury of Knowledge which sets forth vipassana meditation. Now this segment has 4 parts. The first part lists and explains about the prerequisites for this type of practice. The second part sets forth the particular types of vipassana, and the third part, which we the explanations of which we began yesterday, is classification according to the essential nature. Correction Now, as I discovered yesterday, the translation which you have online, and I presume you've made a printout of it, says the classification is into 4 types of vipassana. It should be into 3 types of vipassana. In terms of investigating the essential nature of this practice, called vipassana, Laktong in Tibetan, insight in English, or seeing that which is superior. Now, the 3 types are 1, in terms of what vipassana meditation is about essentially. The first of the 3 in that list is to be named in the translation. The name in English is discriminating. It should rather be differentiating perspectives. And as we saw yesterday, what is at hand in terms of the first of the 3 types of vipassana here, that have to do with the essential nature of this practice, or what this practice essentially is about rather, has to do with differentiating the various perspectives of outer objects of knowledge. Then we have the second of the 3, which in the translation is in English called fully discriminating. I would rather at this point change that to differentiating perspectives further. And as Khenpo Rinpoche explained yesterday, this has to do with perspectives as to knowledge itself, the mind itself, so not outer objects. And then we have the third, which we didn't go through yesterday. We will start that today. So it's differentiating perspectives in the context of the essence itself.
Yeah.
And essence here, or essence itself, is a reference to what both outer objects and the mind which knows these objects in fact are. So essential nature here, in terms of various perspectives, has to do with both previous categories. So these, each of them, as Khenpo Rinpoche also explained today, the perspectives are differentiated by way of 2 methods, called investigation and analysis. And the 3 categories just listed are also called the 3 gateways. So I just wanted to make clear that this translation, which was done 38 years ago, I found these discrepancies. there should be 3 instead of 4 types. Primarily. I mean, the previous names are sort of okay, but they don't express the full meaning of the Tibetan term. Only half of it, as it were.
But 4 3 say chindo.
Yeah.
4 say ate penna number jepa la ni raptun jepa la ni de ye yung doa.
The mathematics ko min bro da.
Number jepa tongbo number jepa la
Tokpadan chepa.
tokpadan jepa ni je.
Lare.
Rap number jepa la tokpadan jepa ni je de yerwa.
Da ngan så senare va.
Ore.
Chokre.
Kan det start.
Tokpadan köpa ni va.
Den
Tokpa, chik, köpa, ni.
제예 시율라 제추 똑백원이 제바당 제백원이 제바니
Yes.
제예
Det är ni då va, ni.
니 요래 제예 딱거 제지랑 잡으러
Chishi koran chikre. Chishila.
다들 말에
Hona.
다 땡엔지 랑거니 채나 랍도
Ore tokpadan köpa chikt sigogen då.
예 랍도 제바 넘버 제바
Rapto tepa.
랍도 제바 니 총송아
Rere.
ngô 제바도 숨
Sum.
고스 땡엔지 고숨 세도아
Re tingi singi gosum.
어야 다 때네 고 통고 넘버 제바라 니 랍도 제바라 니데 예
Tenne tok koran chikt ut sine tenne shiregen då. Mathematical systems are not
단백질 괜찮
Men det
단백질
är det va, shiregen min då. Tokpadan köpa ner va. Det är en tokkseken till.
말에 저런 양한테 예예 땡엔진 게네 샤롱도
Aha.
땡엔진 건 채나 예와 숨래
Re.
넘버 제바 랍도 제바 ngô
Tenne shi
Ngô
det
som.
hangla kogogen då.
이제데 가르 고고 열으스나
Aha.
원나 넘버 제바라 낭세기니 랍도 제바라 낭세기니
Ja.
대 예차소
Yeah, well, I get that point and I'm going to communicate it. I still think different mathematical system, but never mind. So, shidi kana ju pöjignarna, tenne lelagringarna. Det gick. Nga det pöjig det min dogatan.
예더 숨센도
Mare, tsavananga.
예
Tokyung
숨
Boni. So you have the 3 types listed, which are 3 types of samadhi, where there is a variation as to the object of samadhi, and therefore there would also be a variation in terms of the mind exercising the samadhi in question. So there are 3 types of vipassana, the 3 that were listed. Then you have, in terms of the first 2 of these 3 types, the additional perspective in terms of how the meditation is executed. You have the additional perspective of investigation and analysis. And that's where number 4 comes in. So this additional feature, which is applied in terms of the first two of the three types of samadhi, makes for the number 4 in the text. And so in this translation that you have been given a printout of online, I can't recall where 4 came from here, because the translation was done 38 years ago, whether it's simply a typing error or whether the explanations given at the time were different. Never mind, make the correction I told you to do earlier, because it should be 3 types and not 4.
다때 제용도 다 가장 율라 제배 진입 비추라 제추 똑바른 제바데 휴차른데.
So yesterday Khenpo Rinpoche explained the first of the 3 types of samadhi, also called the 3 gateways, meaning the 3 gateways to samadhi. The first was about differentiating various perspectives in the context of outer objects of knowledge. And these explanations were given yesterday, and there was the additional 4th feature incorporated in the explanations yesterday. The 4th feature, additional feature, being that of investigation and analysis. While making use of investigation and analysis, while differentiating perspectives as to objects of knowledge, outer objects of knowledge. Explanations of the second of the 3 were started yesterday. We will continue with these explanations now.
대체용도 benna sida 다 raptu number jepa sungdoa.
Raptu number jepa.
Raptu number jepa sedu 다 number dingen ji yom jesa te 진예 비추래
진예래
지따 비추대 차근도와.
So this was also explained in brief yesterday. Khenpo Rinpoche repeats today. Here the name is differentiating perspectives further. One could also say more conclusively, because you have to give thought to that there are 2 basic types of object where perspectives are looked for, looked into, or investigated. You have outer objects of knowledge, as many as there are, meaning all objects of knowledge. And then you have knowledge which looks into the perspectives of these objects. And that's then the second type of samadhi in terms of the 3 as to vipassana meditation. And in the Tibetan wording, one would perhaps translate that as the phenomena or phenomenon which sees the actual nature in terms of this perspective, that of what the mind in fact is in terms of its true nature.
Tati che yon de tan de la tong po tong pe gab la perna
De la tokche yango.
tokje ni go ge ro.
And here the fourth additional feature of investigation and analysis also applies, is also part of the method.
Perna ta chitta wa de yurjin lo de la je patang ne ngai sem sekende tang ran sem segi ro.
And here the practitioner uses a process where he attempts to differentiate between the different perspectives of the mind itself, or the knowledge which knows something. Whatever that something may be is now irrelevant, because here the practitioner looks at the workings of the mind itself with the aim of acquiring insight of mind's true nature.
Tiyin de perna ngaran so lo palba chi gung ma jana sem sing de yeju da je ta je ma to kan de ye dang su ge yang xie yo ma de.
Now, a regular person in the world has never given any thought to this. Everyone just presumes they are endowed with a mind which truly exists, or a mindset, however one wants to phrase it, which truly exists, which has a real reality. This is the presumption all individuals make.
Tige yil yab tenne nam che yue sing ge zo ge da ching ri pa da nam che yue sing ge zo ge sem sing ge de le pare se
Now,
sem sing ge de ni sing ge do do de se da tin de ge ja mong bu chung yo ba.
then you have people who, in terms of humanity, who have specialized in various fields of knowledge, various sciences. Individuals who, by the general public, are regarded as individuals who have a more developed or sharper intellect than most. Now, individuals of this group, those who are seen as individuals with a higher than average intellect in terms of how sharp or not sharp the intellect is, they have in the past and do in the present, they have made various presumptions about the so-called mind. Some of them have arrived at the conclusion that the physical brain is the mind. Others have arrived at the conclusion that the seat of the mind is the heart, and so on. There are many conclusions that different individuals have arrived at in their efforts to determine what the so-called mind is.
제단
Now, in terms of various religions, it's the case that for a couple of thousand years, in those various communities, there has been this effort. The effort made to find out what the mind in fact is. However, one could say that the individual in this context who arrived at the truth is Buddha Shakyamuni. In other spiritual approaches, there have been many masters of old who have been able to figure out quite a bit about what the mind in fact is. However, their final conclusions are primarily based in a theistic tradition which upholds the belief in a superior being as the creator of the world and those who live in the world, a god of sorts. And this conclusion, Buddhism refutes. Now, according to Buddhism, the so-called mind is an immaterial phenomenon. And according to Buddhism, the regular mind stream, now we're not talking about mind's true nature, the workings of the regular mind stream is or has primarily to do with the mind's capacity for knowing objects it is in contact with, or which the mind interacts with. Yeah. So the regular so-called mind stream has or functions in the following manner, namely, it has the capacity to make contact with objects of knowledge and to find out what those objects of knowledge are in terms of the regular world. Tokchunigi.
So,
in terms of Vipassana meditation here, where there is a process of differentiating various perspectives, and here it's the perspectives of the mind stream itself. Here you have the fourth additional feature, which is about investigation and analysis. To begin with, what the practitioner of Vipassana meditation does here, in terms of finding out about the various perspectives and workings of the mind stream or the mind, he makes use of investigation to begin with. He investigates how the mind comes in contact with and knows objects of knowledge, what that working involves, the processes that are involved, and what the mistakes that this type of knowledge makes in terms of how it knows objects of knowledge. Tene notul karare songso.
Notul karishori orasana. Lo da pashu yonde. Pasha topji sharvege yujin nambate dindrubre sa.
So the mistake here, which is found out by the method named investigation, is found to be that the object of knowledge, which the mind or knowledge knows, is in contact with and knows, interacts with, here the knowledge which interacts with and knows the object fails to know that the object of knowledge at hand is simply a manifestation originating with one or many predispositions stored in the mind stream and resulting from actions of the past. Failing to see this, knowledge which knows an object draws the mistaken conclusion that the object is real, that it has a real reality. It fails to see, in terms of the worldly mindset, that the object of knowledge at hand lacks a real reality, is divorced of a real reality. And this is found out by way of using the method named investigation. As the practitioner of Vipassana meditation starts to employ or train in the second of the three samadhis, where he primarily looks at the mind itself and its workings in terms of how the mind perceives outer objects and the conclusions, the worldly mindset, the mistaken conclusions, the worldly mindset makes in terms of that process. Regular people in the world act in all instances on the basis of the presumption that all objects of knowledge, as many as there are, have a real reality. This is the basic outlook of the worldly mindset. If a person sets out on investigating these objects of knowledge according to the instructions of Vipassana meditation, he would find out that he's mistaken in all instances. He would find out in the end, it's a long process of course, but he would find out in the end, if he applies himself to the method called investigation, that there isn't a single thing that has a real reality. And in terms of presuming that there is a real reality within each and every phenomenon, that real reality is named, if one translates the term literally, the self of the thing in question. Now, the self would be synonymous with the perceived identity of the phenomenon. You know, you have two types of self. In terms of the individual and in terms of outer objects of knowledge. In both Sanskrit and in Tibetan, the word self is used. Just a second to make it clear. Yes, I just have to have the English thing here. Oh, why do they do this? If one looks for, just to clarify a bit, you see, very often, if not always, what happens is that any given person who hears a word will understand it on the basis of how much he knows about that word, language-wise, his language knowledge of the word. And very often that's limited. So self to most people has to do with a living being or an individual. But that's a mistake to jump to that conclusion because in any language, English or otherwise, the word self takes many more meanings. And in order to make that clear, I looked up on one of the authoritative dictionaries a list of synonyms just to make clear to you that don't jump to this conclusion, because then you can't follow the explanations if you base it on your limited understanding of the word that's used. So synonyms for self are character, constitution, nature, personality, and so on. There are many. And words related to self are distinctiveness, individuality, uniqueness, and so on. And an outer object of knowledge, therefore, can be said to have a self, meaning a specific character, a specific identity of sorts. It's not required when using this word that an individual, a living being, is at hand. Material objects that are not endowed with a mind can also have a self. So, tene karusungson.
Bernande dak singen de kandech kogundo tena dak sidi chitang nga sambatsam deyang marawa.
So the word self doesn't just mean I.
Penna di chörwa.
Now this eyeglass container is a phenomenon.
Tante dembare samdu dembare sam dagu jemgdoa.
And any person in the world, when seeing the eyeglass container, sees it as having a reality of its own in terms of its specific shape, form, color, and whatnot, and function. So the eyeglass container does have a self. You see? It does have a self. And it's not wrong to say that, because the English language, the French language, all languages define self as was explained in brief. So, a material object of knowledge can be said to have a self.
Perna de demba yindang menla ngaran so tribe lo la takje khran tang manyong lo demba yinju tachen dagu jabsha.
You see, in the world, the use of language and the wider meaning of the word self, which the majority of individuals don't have a clue about because they never bother to find out. And in fact, most of the time, they are not in need of this knowledge because they never even doubt that this eyeglass container or container for spectacles, they never doubt its reality. It is real from the beginning to the mind of this sort of person, and this sort of person, if you tell this sort of person, oh, but this thing doesn't have a self, they will say, of course not, it's a dead thing. Because the person in question has never bothered with acquiring a wider knowledge of the words he uses. Whereas in the Buddhist scriptures, individuals are recommended and instructed to ask themselves the question, is this eyeglass case real or not? Something a worldly person would never even think of asking. Now, in order to go back to this question, if the eyeglass case is real, then the person who makes that claim should be able to prove that. How is it real? What makes it real? Where is its self or soul, as it were? that makes for its real reality.
Te yeno kel sana tansa lesona ta khazan shushu re dutin ta tende re dogro.
However, as was explained yesterday in terms of the first of the three gateways to samadhi in the context of vipassana meditation, any object, material object, is in the end simply a collection of innumerable subtle material particles, atoms and subatomic particles, and each individual particle can be divided into smaller and smaller units in an infinite progression. So then, where is the self that gives the eyeglass case, or that makes for a real reality in the eyeglass case? You simply can't find it. And this is one of the investigations you make in order to make progress on the path of vipassana meditation.
Tene te inde ta demba jindu sambate le partang do.
So what is the real reality that most individuals imagine is there? Well,
Log par ya yam do.
It's simply a mental fabrication. It's an idea that the person in question imposes upon the object.
Tega na singe nge phungbo nge dibi chöndala.
And then if you look at the individual, him or herself, according to the Buddhist tradition, a so-called individual, a sentient being, is made up of is composed of 5 major things, in Sanskrit called the 5 skandhas, in English the 5 psychophysical constituents.
Ta te nga sambate yur gelendu na mendo takche chinanda.
So, in So, in terms of this additional feature named investigation, the practitioner of vipassana meditation applies that here as well, the same type of investigation that has just been explained in brief. And the end result will be, if the investigation is done properly according to the instructions, that what is found is a collection of parts where each individual part can be divided into smaller and smaller units, proving that there is no real reality. There isn't a self or soul of sorts within the individual that makes the individual real. Again, the idea of a real person or a truly existent individual is simply a mental fabrication, an idea imposed upon the object we call an individual. So, both the notion of a truly existent individual and the notion of a real reality in all outer objects of knowledge, both are but mental fabrications, notions or ideas imposed upon an object of knowledge. So what is it that Buddhism refutes the validity of these two notions. It tells you that these notions are false, these notions are mistaken, because there is no individual self as to an individual, nor is there a real reality in any outer object of knowledge. However, that is not synonymous with a mere nothingness, because there still are the manifestations of outer objects of knowledge and the manifestations of so many different types of sentient being, resulting from a collection of workings based in predispositions acquired by way of various types of action, virtues and non-virtues. Yeah. And then we have the second part of the fourth additional feature, analysis, which is a method that somewhat differs in terms of its execution and nature. It differs from the previous named investigation. However, the aim is the same, namely to bring about knowledge of the fact that there isn't a self of sorts, a soul of sorts, within the individual, nor is there a self of sorts or a soul of sorts within outer objects of knowledge. Dönta chikpara.
Dönta hanam chikpara. Yene yang tat ti korte yang shifta shugi sani.
And tomorrow, Khenpo Rinpoche will explain a bit about this second perspective of the fourth additional feature, the perspective called analysis. Now, in terms of question and answering period this afternoon, there won't be one because there is only one question, and so Khenpo Rinpoche will answer that question here and now, because there isn't much point in making the work of gathering for a separate session, as there is just one question. So it will be answered now, and so I should read out the question to you. So, every time this person says the following, or asks explains the following and then asks a question. Every time I listen to Khenpo Rinpoche, at the beginning I'm enthusiastic and at the end depressed. When I see the motivation, or when I hear of the motivation of masters of the past, compared to my completely confused motivation. So the person here obviously feels that her motivation is not, she hasn't been able to generate the motivation in the context of the body mind to the same extent as masters of old. Therefore, she says, I think to myself, in what state will I die because of my confused motivation, and where will I be reborn? I am deeply aware of this, despite my efforts, the more efforts I make, I have the impression that I go backwards, because I see my worldly states of mind more clearly, and just how difficult it is to change the worldly mindset. Every day I invoke the blessings of the Buddha, but because of my past and present karma, I'm unable to transform the worldly mindset. What does Khenpo Rinpoche think about this? And thank you if he could give advice. And then the person ends with saying, thanks to those who translate. Without them, nothing would be possible in terms of understanding the authentic Dharma.
Lasso, Tuan the Nankin Te, Anayun Dane Sare,
Did lap chogre?
did life and do rock.
So?
Tembiore.
No.
Then Anayun Dane Sare, when a Tane Gabushon, Anayun Dane took the chess.
Khenpo Rinpoche says, the person who asked this question is Annie Jönten of Dakpo Kajeling. And Khenpo Rinpoche says, thank you so much. This is a very good question.
Perna, Shonchub Semla, Rawachi Damne, Rangula. Semchi German Maimba Chemeva Sheju Zamde Hajang to Kechamburis.
Because evidently Annie Jönten realizes that she herself has not yet been able to fully generate the authentic body mind, and the realization that one hasn't been able to do that points to the, I suppose one could say, mindfulness of the person who sees that, in this case, she herself hasn't yet been able to do this.
Talo Mumbo Chigrin Lange Tapul Peche Narangus, Loni Shutsang, Zaduk Sigil Jarre, Hanam, then you that machine June Keshe, Tenzo one Tandaj, Tansha, Ten Gauchon sayings.
Khenpo says his reaction to the question is one of joy. He thinks to himself that all those years, 26 or 27, however many, that he's been doing the summer course at Dakpo Kajeling, at least there's one person who got the idea about her own personal state.
Shanchu Simpson get the left level to take a chocho to the Galacaudes.
It's, in fact, exceedingly difficult to generate the authentic body-mind. It may be that some individuals imagine they have, but often it's a matter of just imagination.
Penna, Yawasha to a Kayang, Shanchu Simonet Juliella, Tene, Galba Chitang was to do some yards.
Buddha Shakyamuni himself, prior to his enlightenment, practiced one-pointedly for tens of thousands of lifetimes in order to be able to generate the authentic body-mind. It's not an easy thing to do.
Perna, Tantange Peshuvina. You can get better to Shifuji on top of the Montu Ten. Aka, somebody, Sambasangore, Yakushidare, Sonam Gutsosa Gretin, and Shonchip Simpson get it in Marwa.
For example, in terms of the body-mind, if one considers the war going on in Ukraine, most of you will have seen images on the television screen as to what happens to the people there. And most of you would therefore feel compassion towards the people trapped there in this situation. And that is in and of itself a virtuous reaction, a virtuous thought, that of feeling sorry for those people who suffer there. But just feeling bad about someone's suffering isn't synonymous with the authentic body-mind. The authentic body-mind is much more than that.
Namkadanyam Besemjin Sangmala, Lane la Namenan Berev gonna paint out of a Semjil Segeorva, Sempona.
The authentic body-mind is about a mindset which is concerned with all sentient beings in number as vast as the sky. In terms of achieving the welfare of all of them. It's not about being touched by seeing images of horrific. It's not limited to being touched by scenes of horrific suffering displayed on the television screen. There is much more to the body-mind.
Tene tagana shinge chushune depression chun danju goyo mares.
And Khenpo Rinpoche says to Annie Jönten that there is no cause for you being depressed at the end of a teaching, for example.
Nganzo chu da ngada lama yongda chi marite chu de kodu yeba te kalwa sangurwa. Nga lama yongda chi marite nge karshe gi yorsna sanje gi song sede gi yorwa. Te rang ko to the she won't the pe mesiva kalwa sangwa yin samne gawa che gebe yulres.
Khenpo Rinpoche thinks you should rather be filled with joy. He says he himself is not a perfect Buddhist master. However, the words he speaks are the words of Buddha Shakyamuni. It's not some self-made sort of theory he sets forth here. It's all based in the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni. And for you to have realized that your level as to generating the body-mind is insufficient, that in itself is a good thing, pointing to, as Khenpo Rinpoche said earlier, that you're seeing things clearly. And that should inspire joy rather than depression.
Then shonchib semda samna yang tangda te nga khaba che yung sambe peje tendeg sam tang gogre tingim to duwa ji nga che ro jure ting gogum to kain sena shonchib sem sengite sam tangi shisona sem one ji gyula ma che na yang shiwa le somorwa shonchib sem je ta hyana dene dewan rowarchi
and Khenpo Rinpoche doesn't think you need to worry too much about your possible future rebirth. Because as the Indian Buddhist master Shantideva said, to think of the body-mind and its various perspectives in a perhaps imperfect way, but the fact of being preoccupied with this topic, the body-mind, will make for, even though one's level is not the highest, even so, that virtuous mindset will bring about a good rebirth where the individual can continue to develop.
Gari lamga sani mesa lamga chaga choga chi rogo na ta sangbo chi chonju na kale taka se yong marwa.
Now, at the time of death, if the practitioner is able to keep the body-mind, keep awareness of the body-mind, even though on a lower, perhaps imperfect level, and focus on Buddha Shakyamuni, that would be sufficient in terms of taking a good rebirth and where practice can continue and therefore progress can be made. An example which illustrates this is the following, namely that of traveling on a very narrow and difficult to travel road. If you're on such a path or on such a road, if you have a good and well-trained horse that you can ride, then it will be quite easy to travel that road, because the horse will know how to navigate and how to manage the difficulties of this difficult path or road. Similarly, a mindset preoccupied with the body-mind and coupled with an attention of Buddha Shakyamuni, that mindset will be able to navigate the difficult path after death and before a new rebirth.
Pena tati shen rodu tak kap da tati lamga dukcha tenjon toze rodu madewa ta tinde chedu kup toze na gire te yin yang kabar de gogu yin tla le habu che lem rogro.
Now, of course, as you're riding a horse, your behind may get a bit sore because the road is not the most easy to travel and so on. But who cares? The horse will be able to bring you to your destination.
Tang ngama tago ne yu lama shudu shu yu sa yu. Pen ngolo jun par ka song do. Ngaran so kor ne be simjin res. Chive tula shonchup sem de majeveche.
Now, all of us born in the world, at the time of death,
chive tula ta pena ta tingen zen de so mena yang shonchup sem de majena.
Even though we may not be accomplished in samadhi, meaning we are not able to be seated in meditation upon death, what we can do is to preoccupy ourselves with the body-mind provided that we have educated ourselves about the body-mind. And it is then certain that we will take a good rebirth. According to Golo Shönupal, a Tibetan Buddhist master of old, very well known for his writings and his accomplishment in scholarship. He authored, among other things, a very extensive commentary to the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra.
Berna songs. Kesi leg hang my yone, chick lugin on song in a chicky bujil linger song.
One may perhaps not, it depends upon the workings of one's personal karma. It's not assured that one will take rebirth as a human being, perhaps. However, the individual who preoccupies himself at death with the body-mind will take a good rebirth. So, example, the person, because of past non-virtuous actions, may not be able to take rebirth as a human being again. However, if he is, for example, because of his past non-virtuous actions, to take rebirth as an animal, he would probably take rebirth as, for example, a dog who is kept by a person who loves the dog in question and keeps that dog as his pet. We all know that some people are very, very kind to their pets.
And then
the karma for the animal rebirth will of course come to its end, and then once that karma is exhausted, it may be that next time one is reborn as a human being who can continue to practice, for example. Some pets are quite unusual. There is the Tibetan Lama in charge of the Karma Kaji Center in Sweden. His name is Lama Khenpo Rinpoche. He has a little dog, very cute. And his dog it even saves little insects from being trampled on. It apparently, in its mind, its mind apparently is endowed with a lot of virtuous predispositions. Tangi alene.
Yeah, depend on Lamgar Gnana, Buddha which is hard, that Gadig Zindo section, the Kopan, Rojetsu, Dajan, Lamgasul.
Chödrak Rinpoche takes the dog for walks, and sometimes on the road, when there is an insect passing, the dog seems to realize that it will be run over by a car next time. The dog goes up, picks it up with his tongue and brings it to the side of the road. He actually saves little insects from being crushed by cars.
Then Koran lifetime and the Lama chicken, Sambochecha, the correct boogie layer hearts chicken.
And this dog has a very pleasant life. Chödrak Rinpoche more or less sees the dog as a child of his. He's very kind.
13 to Arata Sanchu Simpson get
Even though in this life one may not be able to get to the level of authentic body-mind, there is still a lot one can do in terms of developing the body-mind that will be helpful in terms of a future rebirth and so on and so forth.
Late Professor Sambaji Nalkasnas, Shersing Doyin Nantu, Chödrak Chui Shawasing Songtua, Niamata
Kangi Nantu, so?
Shersing Do.
Oh, Shersing.
Chödrak Chui Shawasing. Timma Sonne, Niamata Dina Dere Chida, the Java Zombaling to but the Sanje Kennedy Songto.
There is another example of a recent Tibetan Buddhist master, Professor Senpaji, who recently passed away. He, in one of his conversations with Khenpo Rinpoche, said once, in a Prajna Paramita Sutra, it is one finds a list of 10 actions to be practiced in the context of the sacred Buddha Dharma. And Professor Senpaji had said to Khenpo Rinpoche, Buddha Shakyamuni explained that doing just one of them on a daily basis, meaning that at least one does one of them on a daily basis, would secure a good rebirth. And so the body-mind is the very root of these 10 actions.
Penna Professor Sambaji
and Professor Senpaji told Khenpo Rinpoche in their conversation that this is my practice. I do these 10 on a daily basis. I don't do any other practice. And so in terms of him passing away about a week ago, upon his death, he was seated in meditation for a period of 3 days. So, cultivating the body-mind is something very powerful. Keep that in mind. So during this course, Khenpo Rinpoche has been asked by 2 individuals, Annie Jönten and another person who asked in private, about the body-mind, and he thanks both of them. These is not both of these persons did not ask what one perhaps would call a blah 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 question, where there isn't much substance to anything said in particular. These 2 questions were proper questions, pointing to that these 2 people had really thought through one or many points as to the explanations that have been given. So Khenpo Rinpoche asks all of you who follow his teachings to please focus on the body-mind. If you do, it means that you won't have wasted his time.
Okay. So nam daya tamje zikbani tomne nyebe dranam pamje te jegana je balap truwe sigbe chotlen ro sho.
And I've been asked by Daku Kadilin to also tell all of you that if there are any questions, you need to submit them before 9 o'clock next Wednesday.